Sweden, as I'm pretty sure you know, is super interesting in terms of startup activity. Although it's a small country, it's only 9 million inhabitants, but they've produced companies, like Skype from a Swedish entrepreneur, Spotify, King, Minecraft, that was just acquired by Microsoft. Tons of stuff going on. I'm very happy to introduce Robert, who's going to be moderating the panel, and I'm sure they'll have lots of interesting things to talk about. Robert? Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this session about Swedish startups and why they succeed internationally. My name is Robert Wentrup, and I'm the head of Business Sweden in France. We are here at the LeWeb' with the Swedish booth in the Pullman Hall. We were all happy to welcome to join us in our booth. Today with me I have two distinguished guests. I have Fredrik Hedberg, who is a startup entrepreneur working for Tink. You're also the founder of Telavox and been working for some other companies in the US. And we have Bennich, who is the advisor for the Swedish Venture and Private Equity Association, and also been working a lot with Swedish Mobile Association and a multitasker in general. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Sweden, for those of you who don't know Sweden, Sweden is a small country up in the north, quite cold, quite not so much of sun, and 9 million people. But still, Sweden has succeeded in giving birth to quite a lot of international known Swedish startups. Spotify, Skype, Klarna, Truecaller, and many others. Thomas, if I start with you, what is the secret?
It's great to be here. The secret, it's a tough question, Robert. Thanks for bringing it up. I think it's like we saw a boom in the beginning of 2000, where we had the first boom of internet startups or growth companies, and a lot happened in that region. And we had a lot of companies being funded and got some funding, and also some great exits happened. So even the dot-com boom was a boom. It created a lot of wealth. A lot of companies were sold to the US, and a lot of new angels were started. People who have, sold their company to the US with billion-dollar exits, and the money sometimes stayed in Sweden, and they are eager to invest in new startups. So since the last couple of years, we had the next generation of companies being born. We had a quite good infrastructure of new angels with super deep pockets with a lot of money. And I think that's been very, very important for us, having, angels willing to risk money in great entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's something that happened in late years for that.
Fredrik, what did you say?
No, I totally second what Thomas is talking about here, but I also think it's important to kind of have a little bit longer perspective as well. So if we kind of take that after the boom, but also before the boom, we had historically a culture of very deep engineering companies like Ericsson and Volvo and a bunch of other technology, kind of old school technology companies. That together with a fantastic education system with paid for schools, great engineering schools, a ton of engineers. We've had a culture of a great relationship between engineering and design, for example, over the last decades. All that kind of contributed to the run-up to having these amazing resources in terms of engineering capabilities, etc.
Sweden is sometimes described as a good test market. I've heard this from many startup entrepreneurs, that if you manage to set up an application that works in Sweden, since the population is kind of following a lot of followers, they adapt, early adapters of new trends. It's kind of easy to take that concept and move out internationally. Would you agree that? How is it for you, Tink?
Totally, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We've launched a product in Sweden and seen a successful or a great success so far, and are trying to learn from that to take it to new markets. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about here, that Swedes has historically been very keen on adapting new trends, especially from the West, so to speak, before. We've been very kind of Americanized or Anglo-Saxonized in our culture and kind of on new trends. That together with a great kind of historical infrastructure with a lot of kind of spending on IT, broadband capabilities, etc. We've had such a great penetration of new services. So in many senses, we see Sweden as kind of being a couple of, or 1 or 2 years before a lot of other markets. And so we can test, learn in Sweden, and then apply that in other markets when they kind of catch up.
Sweden actually has 94% of internet penetration, which is way above world average. How would you say, does this matter in launching other infrastructural or the local network, particularly in Stockholm? Is that important?
For what's your question, Robert? The internet penetration.
Yeah.
I mean, the mobile penetration is super high. Everyone is super tech savvy, as you're saying, and everyone loves using tech. What I think is super important amongst the startup is, like, since we are from such a tiny country where it's very cold and very snowy in the winter times, and the market is so cold, so small, so we have to think globally from start. So when you meet a startup, they have a global mindset from start. So it's like, how can I scale this globally is one of the first questions the companies ask themselves. So it's not, scaling is not an issue. Scaling is something you bring with you from start. So I think that's one of the key success factors. That it's the smallness creates an urge to go global, and that we have had a lot of global companies before. So it's something that people are used to doing.
So where do let's say we have a startup in Sweden, which countries do they target after the Swedish market?
Maybe that's your question.
No, that's a tough question because it's so highly kind of industry or startup specific. There's so many different kind of aspects that vary from market to market. I mean, if we just take Europe for an example, it's not only the mobile savviness and penetration in our case, for example, it's about privacy, kind of how people think about privacy, how people kind of adopt new services, etc. It's really hard, but I mean, as we're kind of in the forefront in Sweden in terms of mobile penetration, as you said, and kind of usage, it's most common to I guess target kind of countries that are almost as much in the forefront, and that's typically like the UK, US, and so on.
If we look at some of the challenges, because everything is not la vie en rose, as you say here in France. For example, I've heard that it's the demand for programmers, skillful programmers, can be a problem in Stockholm. Do you agree with that, or do you see other issues or challenges?
No, totally, and that's one of the biggest or hardest things, both for us, kind of personally, but also for a lot of our startup peers. So that it's such a high demand of great engineers, and because great engineers can have a 10x difference from kind of a bad engineer, or what would you call it? The competition is really, really high, and we compete with larger companies, both the traditional tech companies, but also kind of larger startups like Spotify, etc. So it's super hard.
Thomas, any comment on that?
It's talent attraction is a problem. I mean, a little bit an issue that we have to handle. There's so many great startups that are competing on the talent, so it's a little bit an issue that needs to be addressed in a smart way.
I actually saw an interesting figure the other day that the second most common job for a guy in Stockholm was actually a software engineer, which sounded ridiculous, but
that's impressive. And other challenge I've heard is about the access of capital, venture capital. That there's been too few Swedish firms, VCs. Is that changing this pattern?
I think the VC market in Sweden is quite good. It's more old, entrepreneurs, ex-entrepreneurs who are now VC people, which is super good because they know how to build a business. They're a little bit on the sides on the entrepreneurs, helping them grow their business with some smart advice. So it's a little bit smarter money. We see a lot of new funds popping up, and I think we have a great angel network. So there's a lot of positives on that side. And there's a lot of new funds popping up. So I don't think the capital is that bad. Maybe a little bit in the early phases. We did a little bit more growth capital. Early stage financing is always an issue, but there's a lot of risk in that moment. So that's the tough part. What do you say?
No, I totally agree, and I think it's been a very positive trend over the last decade. When I started my last company, we did that in 2002. And I mean, the angel scene, for example, was non-existent, right? We had a couple of kind of big, kind of traditional like PE/VC funds, that did a large, kind of the larger deals. But I mean, it's been really an explosion in the angel scene, I think, in Sweden, much because of the great exits that Thomas was talking about.
Could you say something about what signifies, what characterizes Swedish startup culture? What is that? Is that different from I don't know, Silicon Valley startup mentality or Israeli?
Sure. So I think it's a very, very big difference, and I think it's hard to describe. But I think we, as a kind of a Swedish culture and society, has been very kind of egalitarian, very kind of flat organizations, and kind of consensus-driven, and that's obviously can have its drawbacks. Yeah. But I also think it fosters a great climate for innovation. That we run our organizations much flatter and more dynamic than maybe in other kind of more hierarchical societies, I guess. And that's been, I think it's a big difference.
I think we see a lot of the US culture also pay it forward. Startups are very eager to help other startups, and that culture is now nailed down in the society. I see a lot of people, we need to how do we grow in the US? And then other startups help other startups to handle their issues. So there's a lot of pay it forward culture helping other companies, and I think that's great.
Do you see any risk that, I mean, there's been a lot of particularly American firms having acquired some Swedish firms. Lately it was Minecraft Mojang, which was acquired by Microsoft. Do you see any risk that the startups will flee the Swedish market, maybe European market, that we're going to lose competitiveness?
I think, like you're saying, I think this is a European issue, that all of the ecosystems are US-based. That's most of the startups are dependent on. So everything is, you have to have a good relationship with Google, Apple, Facebook, or Microsoft, in some sense. And that's, it's not controlled by the Europeans. So it's something we need to address a little bit more. It would be good to see some other different ecosystems in Europe that we can address. And also with regards to exits, a lot of the exits are with US firms. So in Sweden, we would be happy to see Ericsson doing more acquisitions in Sweden, or our big operators, or all bigger companies buying, local innovation companies. That would be excellent, and that's not happening. So that's something that we need to address a little bit more.
But maybe you were in the venture capital industry. Do you also look at international American startups to purchase?
Every venture person looks at every good deal, so that's done. But you have to have your focus.
And what do you say, Fredrik, as an entrepreneur? Is it the big dream of getting a big deal with Google and establishing in Silicon Valley? You prefer to stay long term in Sweden?
No, definitely not. And I think I guess it's somewhat corny, but I think that's not like the entrepreneur's dream to plan for an exit in 3 years or something. I mean, or at least me, we're doing this to build something to be able to affect people and build great things. And that's something that's, I mean, it's not something you should plan for. I think. I mean, obviously there should be some liquidity sometime for your investors, I guess.
Good. This is actually a very good question. We have a Swedish company in the startup competition here, Natural Cycles, which is in final, and they actually have their key programmer is a female. This question is about gender equality. I heard it was very low gender equality in Berlin. How would you assess the Swedish startup scene in terms of gender equality?
I think it's hard for me to compare to Berlin because I have no idea how it is in Berlin. But I think in general it's still very, very bad in the Swedish startup scene, and we've seen and we're as a company involved in a couple of initiatives to raise the question, and we've seen an amazing development on that just over the last year actually, which is fantastic. But I think it's in general it's ridiculously bad. It's embarrassing actually.
You agree?
I agree, but we see a very positive trend.
Yes, of course.
It's a very positive trend, but it's still not up to par. It's not totally equal. But I think we see a very, very positive movement in that direction. Yeah. And there's a lot of good startups by female entrepreneurs that are super stellar, and they're doing great. that are popping up. We had Volumental doing the imaging, scanning for footwear. It's a superstar company. We had a lot of other ones that are doing great. The startup hub in Sweden called SUP46 is run by a woman called Jessica Stark. So it's a lot of involvement with women in different aspects, and that's growing. And people are handling that in a good way, but we still need to do more.
I didn't want to paint a too gloomy picture. We're definitely on the right track, but it could be much better.
All right. So, Fredrik and Thomas, thank you very much, and thank you for listening to our session about Swedish startups. Thank you.